The day started like any other, but it quickly spiraled into something I never saw coming. I was at my desk, buried in blueprints and zoning maps, when my phone buzzed insistently. It was a voicemail from my mom, Marjorie. Her voice was shaky, almost breaking, as she talked about how Sloan had turned the family's lakeside cottage into some kind of influencer party hub. It was chaos, she said, and she and Dad were at their wits' end. "Greer, we need you," she pleaded, her words echoing in my head long after the message ended. I'm Greer, the responsible one. At 32, I'm an urban planner, the kind of person who thrives on order and structure. But this was a mess I couldn't ignore. My sister, Sloan, has always been a whirlwind, chasing social media fame like it was oxygen. But turning our parents' sanctuary into a circus? That was a new low. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, a mix of anger and guilt. I should have been there, should have seen this coming. But life has a funny way of keeping you busy with your own problems until someone else's become impossible to ignore. Eli, I called out to my partner, who was working in the next room. I need to head to the cottage. Sloane's causing trouble again. He looked up, concern etched on his face. Want me to come with you? No, I'll handle it, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. It's just family stuff. Packing a bag, I couldn't shake off the feeling that this trip would be different. Sloan and I have always had our differences, but this felt bigger, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. As I drove, the miles seemed to stretch longer, my mind racing with what I might find. When I finally arrived, the sight was worse than I imagined. Music pulsed through the walls, and people I didn't recognize lounged on the porch, drinks in hand. My dad, Walter, was trying to keep things under control, but he looked exhausted. A shadow of the man who once taught high school history with such passion. I found my mom in the kitchen, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Greer, she sighed, relief and worry mingling in her voice. I'm here, Mom. We'll figure this out, I promised, though I wasn't sure how. As I stepped outside, Sloan was in the middle of a live stream, laughing with her friends. She looked up, spotting me, and her smile faltered. Oh, look who decided to show up, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Sloan, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She rolled her eyes, dismissing me with a wave. Later, Greer. I'm busy. I watched her turn back to her friends, frustration boiling inside me. This wasn't just about a party, it was about respect, about family. And if Sloan couldn't see that, then maybe it was time to make her. As I stood there, the weight of what needed to be done settled heavily on my shoulders. I knew this was just the beginning. Whatever it took, I was going to protect my family, even if it meant confronting the storm head-on. The cottage looked like a war zone of glitter and empty bottles. As I navigated through the chaos, I found my dad trying to reason with a group of 20-somethings who were more interested in their phones than his pleas for order. Dad, let me handle this, I said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He nodded, relief washing over his tired features, and retreated to the kitchen where Mom was. I pushed my way through the crowd, my patience wearing thin. Sloan was in the middle of posing for a photo, her husband Nolan strumming his guitar in the background. The moment she saw me, her smile turned to a smirk. Greer, you're harshing the vibe, she said, her tone light but her eyes challenging. Sloan, this have to stop, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom and Dad didn't sign up for this. She rolled her eyes, her friends giggling at our exchange. They're fine. It's just a little fun. Fun, I said, gesturing around at the mess. This is their home, not a nightclub. Sloane's expression hardened. You're just jealous, Greer. You've always been. There it was, the accusation that stung more than I cared to admit. But I refused to let her see how much it hurt. This isn't about jealousy, Sloan. It's about respect. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. Respect? Coming from the sister who's always been too busy to visit? That's rich. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my hands clenching into fists. This isn't about me. Isn't it? She shot back, her voice rising above the music. You're just mad because I'm living a life you can't understand. The crowd around us had grown silent, their eyes flicking between us like spectators at a tennis match. I glanced at Nolan, hoping for some backup, but he just shrugged, strumming his guitar absent-mindedly. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. Sloane's facade cracked for a moment, a flicker of something vulnerable in her eyes. But she quickly masked it with bravado. Because I can, Greer. Because I want to. I stood there, at a loss for words, feeling the weight of our fractured relationship pressing down on me. This wasn't just about a party. It was about years of unresolved tension, of paths diverged. As I turned to leave, I overheard one of Sloane's friends whisper, "Isn't that the sister who's always playing the hero?" That was it. I walked away, my mind racing with what to do next. This wasn't just a sibling spat, it was a chasm that threatened to swallow us whole. I needed a plan, but more than that, I needed to understand why Sloane was so hell-bent on self-destruction. Back inside, my parents sat at the kitchen table, their faces lined with worry. "We're sorry, Greer," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not your fault," I replied, feeling the sting of helplessness. "But we need to do something. Together." As I sat with them, the murmur of the party outside seemed distant, my mind already racing with possibilities. There had to be a way to reach Sloane, to bridge the gap before it was too late. But how? That was the question that lingered unanswered as the night wore on. The next morning, the cottage was eerily quiet. The partygoers had left, leaving behind a mess of epic proportions. I was cleaning up the aftermath when I stumbled upon a stack of bank statements on the kitchen counter. The sight of my parents' names on the documents made my heart sink. I picked them up, skimming through the pages, and what I found left me cold. Sloane had been dipping into Mom and Dad's retirement savings, siphoning money to fund her lavish parties and online persona. I felt the air leave my lungs, my hands trembling as I tried to comprehend the betrayal. This wasn't just reckless behavior. It was a full-blown crisis. I found my parents in the living room, their faces drawn with worry. I held up the statements, my voice barely concealing my outrage. "Did you know about this?" Mom looked away, her silence speaking volumes. Dad sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We hoped it was just a temporary thing, Greer. We didn't want to push her away." "Push her away?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my words. "She's draining you dry, and you're worried about pushing her away?" "We thought she'd come to her senses," Mom said softly, her eyes pleading for understanding. I shook my head, frustration bubbling over. This isn't about coming to her senses. This is about responsibility, about protecting what you've worked for. The room felt stifling, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on us. I needed air, space to think. I stepped outside, the cool breeze doing little to calm the storm inside me. Just then, Sloane appeared, looking as if she hadn't a care in the world. "What's with the face, Greer?" she asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. I tossed the papers onto the patio table between us. "Explain this." She glanced at the statements, her expression shifting from nonchalance to defensiveness. "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. Sloane crossed her arms, her gaze defiant. "I needed the money, okay? It's not like they were using it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "They're retired, Sloane. They need that money to live." "Don't lecture me, Greer," she snapped, her voice rising. "You don't get it. You never have." "Then make me understand," I challenged, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She hesitated, her bravado cracking just a little. "I'm trying to build something for me and the kids. It's not easy. And this is the way to do it?" I asked, incredulous. "By risking everything Mom and Dad have?" Her silence was answer enough. I felt the ground shift beneath us, the rift widening into a chasm. I wanted to shake her, make her see the destruction she was causing, but I knew it wouldn't help. As I stood there, the enormity of the situation sinking in, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could let this slide, hope for the best, or I could take a stand, even if it meant risking everything. The decision crystallized in my mind, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I would protect my family, even if it meant going against them. Because sometimes, justice wasn't about what was easy, it was about what was right. And I was ready to fight for that, no matter the cost. The cottage was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bank statements, my mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. The weight of my family's future pressed heavily on my shoulders, and I felt the urgency to act. Eli called, his voice steady and reassuring. "How are things?" he asked, though I knew he could sense the tension in my silence. "Complicated," I replied, glancing at the mess around me. "Sloane's gone too far this time. Do you want me to come over?" he offered, always ready to support me. "No, I need to handle this," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But thanks." After hanging up, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. I found Sloane in the backyard, her phone glued to her hand as usual. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. She looked up, her expression guarded. "If this is about the money." "It is," I interrupted, my patience thin. "But it's more than that, Sloane. It's about trust." "Trust," she echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You're the one who's always judging me." "I'm trying to help," I said, taking a step closer, hoping to bridge the gap between us. "But you have to see what you're doing to Mom and Dad." "They're fine," she insisted, though her voice wavered slightly. "Are they?" I countered, watching her closely. "Because it seems like you're using them as a safety net." Her eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there too, fear, maybe. "You don't understand what it's like, Greer. To be in the spotlight, to have everyone watching." "Then help me understand," I urged, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. But before she could respond, Nolan appeared, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by something more serious. "Hey, can we all just calm down?" he suggested, trying to diffuse the tension. "Nolan, this isn't your fight," I said, my focus still on Sloane. "It's my family too," he replied, surprising me with the intensity in his voice. "And maybe we should all take a step back and figure out a solution together." Sloane looked at him, a mix of gratitude and annoyance in her eyes. "I don't need you to fight my battles, Nolan." "No, but we're in this together," he said, his tone gentle but firm. The unexpected solidarity between them caught me off guard. I realized that despite everything, Sloane wasn't entirely alone in this mess. Maybe there was a way to reach her, to find a solution that didn't involve tearing the family apart. But just as I thought we were making progress, Mom rushed out, her face pale. "Greer, it's your father. He's not feeling well." Panic surged through me as I followed her inside. Dad was slumped on the couch, his breathing labored. The tension of the past few days had taken its toll, and I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. "We need to get him to a doctor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. As we scrambled to help him, I realized that everything had changed. The stakes were higher now, and my priorities had shifted. This wasn't just about stopping Sloane, it was about saving my family, in every sense of the word. And I had to find a way to do it before it was too late. After we rushed Dad to the hospital, the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. We sat in the sterile waiting room, the ticking of the clock a constant reminder of the time slipping away. Mom was pacing, her worry etched in every line of her face, while Sloane sat silently, her phone forgotten in her lap. I couldn't sit still, my mind racing with what-ifs and should-haves. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the toll it had taken on our family. I felt the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, the guilt gnawing at my insides. Had I pushed too hard? Had I been too harsh on Sloane? The doctor finally emerged, his expression grave, but not hopeless. "Walter's stable, but he needs rest and less stress," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "It's important that he avoids any more shocks to his system." I nodded, relief mingling with the anxiety still churning in my stomach. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. As we left the hospital, Sloane caught up to me, her expression unreadable. "Greer, Not now," I cut her off, my voice sharper than intended. "We need to get Dad home." She fell silent, but I could feel her eyes on me, a mix of guilt and defiance. We drove back to the cottage in silence, the tension between us palpable. Once home, I helped Dad settle into bed, his exhaustion evident in the way he sank into the pillows. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He gave me a weak smile, his hand reaching for mine. "You did what you thought was right, Greer. I'm proud of you." His words were a balm, but they didn't erase the doubt gnawing at me. I left him to rest and found Sloane waiting in the living room, her arms crossed defensively. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying her uncertainty. "Talk then," I replied, crossing my own arms in a mirror of her stance. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I thought I could handle it. And you didn't think to ask for help?" I asked, frustration leaking into my voice. "I didn't want to be a burden," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I thought I could make it work, make everyone proud." Her words hit me harder than I expected, a flicker of understanding breaking through my anger. "Sloane, you're not a burden. But you need to see the damage you've done." "I know," she said, her voice small. "I just didn't know how to stop." I sighed, the fight leaving me. "We'll figure it out. Together." But before we could delve deeper, Nolan burst in, his face pale. "Greer, you need to see this." He handed me his phone, the screen displaying a news article about Sloane's parties, complete with pictures and details that could only have come from someone close. The article had gone viral, the scandal threatening to ruin Sloane's career and our family's reputation. My heart sank as I realized the consequences of my actions. I had wanted to protect my family, but now I was questioning if I'd gone too far. The path I'd chosen was fraught with unforeseen consequences, and I was left wondering if revenge had clouded my judgment. As I stared at the screen, I knew I was at a crossroads. The choices I made next would define not just my future, but the future of my family. And I had to decide if I was willing to sacrifice everything for justice, or if there was a way to find redemption in the chaos. The family gathering was supposed to be a chance to regroup, to find some semblance of normalcy after the chaos. But as soon as I walked into the room, I felt the tension crackling in the air. Everyone was there: Mom, Dad, Sloane, Nolan, even Eli, who had driven over to support me. But the atmosphere was anything but supportive. Sloane was pacing, her frustration barely contained. "I can't believe you did this, Greer," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "I didn't have a choice," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You were out of control." "Out of control," she echoed, incredulous. "You ruined my life. My career." I shook my head, feeling the weight of her accusation. "I was trying to protect our family. By destroying mine," she shot back, anger and hurt mingling in her eyes. The room was silent, the rest of the family watching our exchange with varying degrees of discomfort. I glanced at Eli, hoping for some reassurance, but his expression was unreadable. "Greer, maybe there's another way," he suggested gently, trying to bridge the gap between us. "There isn't," I insisted, my resolve hardening. "Sloane needs to face the consequences." "Consequences?" Sloane laughed bitterly. "You mean revenge." Her words stung, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. Was that what this had become? A quest for justice twisted into something darker? I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Mom spoke up. "Enough," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't keep tearing each other apart." Dad nodded, his voice weary. "We need to find a way forward, not back." But the path forward seemed impossible, the rift between us too wide to bridge. I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me, the realization that I might have pushed too hard, too fast. Just then, the door swung open and Evan and Maya ran in, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension in the room. They skidded to a halt, sensing the unease, and looked at us with wide, questioning eyes. "Mommy, why is everyone so quiet?" Evan asked, his innocence a painful reminder of what was at stake. Sloane's expression softened, and she knelt to hug them, her anger momentarily forgotten. "It's okay, sweetie. We're just talking." As I watched them, the full weight of the situation hit me. This wasn't just about money or reputation. It was about family, about the future we were shaping for the next generation. And in my quest to protect, I had lost sight of what truly mattered. But before I could voice this realization, Nolan's phone buzzed, drawing his attention. He frowned, reading a message, then looked up with a grim expression. "There's more," he said, his voice tense. "Another article just dropped. It's worse." The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing in as the finality of his words sank in. I had thought I was fighting for justice, but now it felt like I was fighting against an unstoppable tide. The consequences of my actions spiraling out of control. As I stood there, surrounded by the people I loved yet felt so distant from, I realized I was at my lowest point. The path to redemption seemed impossible, the hope of reconciliation slipping through my fingers like sand. And I was left questioning if I had the strength to find a way back, not just for myself, but for all of us. The air in the cottage was tense as I prepared to face Sloane. The family was scattered around the living room, but it felt like the walls were closing in, the weight of our collective history pressing down on us. I knew this confrontation was inevitable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Sloane stood by the window, her back to me, staring out at the lake. I approached her, my footsteps echoing in the silence. "Sloane," I said, my voice steady but laced with emotion. She turned, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "What do you want, Greer?" "To talk," I replied, meeting her gaze. "To really talk." She crossed her arms, a barrier between us. "What's left to say?" "You've already said plenty." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I know you're struggling, Sloane. I know you've been hiding behind all of this." Her eyes widened, surprise flickering across her face. "Who told you that?" "Mom," I admitted, watching her closely. "She's worried about you." "We all are." Sloane's facade cracked, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I didn't want anyone to know." "Why?" I asked, taking a step closer. "Why keep it all inside?" "Because I'm supposed to have it all together," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm supposed to be the successful one, the one who's living the dream." "But it's not real, is it?" I pressed, my heart aching for her. "It's a mask." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the fear and uncertainty she'd been hiding. "I didn't know how to stop," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I didn't know how to ask for help." I reached out, my hand resting on her arm. "You can ask now. It's not too late." For a moment, I thought she would push me away, but then she nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "I'm scared, Greer. I'm scared of failing, of being nothing." "You're not nothing," I said firmly, squeezing her arm. "You're my sister, and I love you. We'll figure this out together." The room was silent, the tension shifting into something softer, more hopeful. But just as I thought we were making progress, Nolan spoke up from the corner. "There's something else you should know." We both turned to him, confusion etched on our faces. "What is it?" Sloane asked, her voice wary. He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've been talking to a therapist. For us, for you. I think it could help." Sloane's eyes widened, a mix of relief and apprehension. "You did that for me?" "For us," he corrected, stepping forward. "I want us to be okay, Sloane." The unexpected revelation hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into the chaos. I felt the shift, the possibility of healing, of finding a new way forward. Sloane turned back to me, her expression softer, more open. "I'm sorry, Greer. For everything. We'll get through this," I promised, feeling the truth of the words in my bones. As we stood there, the family gathered around us, I realized that this was the resolution I hadn't seen coming. Not revenge, not justice, but understanding and support. And in that moment, I knew we were on the path to healing together. The sun was setting over the lake, casting a warm glow through the windows of the cottage. We were gathered around the dining table, the remnants of dinner scattered before us. It felt different now, the air lighter, as if a new chapter was beginning. Sloane was the first to speak, her voice steady but soft. "I've started seeing a therapist," she announced, glancing around at us. "It's helping." There was a murmur of support, and I caught Mom wiping a tear from her eye. "I'm proud of you, Sloan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Sloan smiled, a genuine smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm trying to figure things out for me and the kids." Nolan reached over, squeezing her hand. "We're in this together," he said, and I could see the weight lifting from Sloane's shoulders. I looked at Eli, who nodded encouragingly. It was time for me to share, to open up about my own journey. "Eli and I have been talking," I began, feeling the eyes of my family on me. "We're thinking about starting a family." There was a ripple of surprise, followed by a chorus of congratulations. I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of belonging and hope. "Greer, that's wonderful," Dad said, beaming at me. "You'll be an amazing mom." I smiled, feeling the truth of his words. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't weighed down by the past or the need to fix everything. I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. As the conversation turned to lighter topics, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We had faced our demons, aired our grievances, and now we were finding our way back to each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Later, as we stood on the porch, watching the stars blink into existence, Sloan joined me. "Thank you, Greer," she said, her voice sincere, "for not giving up on me." I turned to her, feeling a swell of affection. "We're sisters. We fight, but we always find our way back." She nodded, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "And about that little article you tipped off." I winced, but she laughed, a sound full of forgiveness. "It's okay. It forced me to face things I was avoiding." We stood in comfortable silence, the night wrapping around us like a familiar blanket. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew we were stronger together. As I looked up at the stars, I felt a sense of closure, of completion. The journey had been tumultuous, but it had led us here, to a place of understanding and growth. And while some questions lingered, like what the future held for each of us, I was content to let them unfold in their own time. For now, I was at peace, ready to embrace the next chapter with open arms, surrounded by the love and strength of my family.